Doctors have finally ruled menstrual cramps as painful as heart attacks.
And that's just like the regular, degular, nothing to write home about ones. Let's do a little story time. When I was like 16, I had gone in for like a regular physical, and they did my lab work, and my iron was super low to the point that the nurse was like, "Are you a vegetarian? Does your mom need to leave so we can talk about an eating disorder? Like, what's up? What's good?" And well, we should have talked about an eating disorder, but that's a different story time. I was like, no, normal. And we determined that it was my periods. I had super heavy periods. So they put me on birth control, progesterone only, which is first generation birth control, which means when we first started medically being like, okay, how do we prevent pregnancy? Like progesterone was the one, and it can, for a lot of folks with uteruses, stop you from having a period, which it did for me. Fast forward to like my mid-20s, I had been taking the progesterone only pill, which if you've ever taken that, you have to take it every single day at basically the exact same time, or like it'll ruin your life. And I was like, yeah, this is terrible. And now that I'm having relations, I need something a little more reliable, not relying on me. So I was like, I don't want to have like hormones in my body. So I got the copper IUD, which is the non-hormonal IUD. And they said that it could increase my cramps, and it could lead to a heavier flow, but don't worry about it. Sure enough, my cramps were so incredibly bad, that like I would have to take off time from work, and I was bleeding a ton, and it ended up being that I became so anemic, which this was part my period, part I had, in fact, had an eating disorder. But I became so anemic that I had to get a blood transfusion when I was 25, which that's very young. And again, the doctors were like, you good? The emergency room doctor's exact words were, well, typically we only see a hemoglobin count at this level for cancer patients or people who have internal bleeding. And I said, this makes me feel good. Anyways, so we determined that there was some internal healing that did need to happen because of my history with an eating disorder. But the main culprit was my very heavy periods. Like and follow for part 2. Okay, yeah, welcome back. If you are just joining, you can watch part 1 here. But we are talking about that time that I almost died because my period was so bad. Shout out to copper IUD. But here's the thing, the copper IUD is not the actual villain, and that's what we're gonna get into. So I had to go on iron pills, which was terrible. So I did a lot of prune juice smoothies and dark leafy greens, whatever I could to get more iron into my body. And then I also went from the copper IUD to the hormonal IUD. If you remember from part 1, I can only take progesterone only birth control because of a type of like migraine that I get. That's not important. What's important is because progesterone is the first generation of birth control, there are very limited versions of how you can take it. There's the pill, which I was on, and it's super sensitive, so that wasn't working. There's the depot shot, which is a shot that you get every 3 months, but I didn't have health insurance, and like Planned Parenthood stays booked and busy. There is a little implant that goes like in your bicep, like under your bicep muscle. And I'd had a couple friends that had done that and didn't have great experiences with it, so I was like, hard pass, don't want to be a cyborg. No offense to anyone who has the implant. And then there's the hormonal IUD, like your of the world. So that's what I ended up going with. Now, you're probably thinking, wait a minute, the solution to this can't be get on something that will stop you from having your period, even though if you have a uterus, a sign of a healthy uterus is irregular period. And you would be correct. So this was all happening in like 2015, 2016. Fast forward to 2019, I'd started having some really intense like back and hip pain. And so went to the doctor. They did a lot of tests, took a lot of blood, poked a lot of things, and just decided that I had good old fashioned fibromyalgia, which, if you're familiar, is kind of used as a catch-all for when there's something going on, but like doctors aren't totally sure. So per usual, I was not convinced, but still had shitty health insurance. So I kind of just did what I could to like self-soothe. I went to acupuncture, I started eating meat again, all kinds of stuff. Fast forward to 2020, and despite having my hormonal IUD, I still get incredibly awful cramps. I've got this weird back hip thing and just like not having a good time. I had moved to Austin around that time and found a doctor who was a Black woman who specialized in women's healthcare and working with people with uteruses, and was also a naturopath. So I was like, yeah, girl, let's get this. She took one look at my chart, spent maybe 5 minutes talking to me, and said, you have fibroids, definitively. And I'll do a part 3 and get into that. Let's get into it. So did an ultrasound, confirmed that I had fibroids. We knew that I had at least 3 and that they were pretty large. And the thing is, if they're over a certain size, then it's a more invasive procedure to have them removed. Also, in case folks don't know, because why would you? Fibroids are non-cancerous tumors, basically, that can attach to the ovaries, uterus, inside, outside. There's all different types. So mine were in fact in my uterus, but they were getting so large that they were starting to like misshape my organs. I won't get too into that though. Because she's a naturopath, we tried some natural remedies to help bring the size down so that I could have a less invasive surgery. We tried that for a few months. Ultimately, my body, they did not get bigger, but they weren't getting smaller either. So I went to a Black OBGYN who specializes in cysts and ovarian cysts and fibroids to start talking about surgery. So last August, I had fibroid surgery to remove my fibroids. There ended up being more than we had originally seen on the ultrasounds, as well as I had to do an MRI before, and they were pretty large. I will put the photo somewhere if you're into that kind of thing. But it ended up being about a 6 to 8 week recovery period. I also got a staph infection, which was awful. My husband became like my bedside nurse, basically. But I'm happy to report that since my fibroids have been removed, I had a new hormonal IUD put in because it was just time for a new one anyways. And my cramps and period in general have been so much better. I didn't realize how much pain I was in and how much pain I was in consistently until I wasn't experiencing it anymore. And so if you're dealing with this kind of stuff, I want to leave you with a couple things. One, listen to your body, believe your body, and be an advocate. When I was going to the doctor, it was so frustrating, constantly being gaslit and not believed, but I also had to be really, really persistent because it's my body and I knew that something wasn't right, even if, they were telling me other things. 2, go at like the first signs. Don't wait until it gets to a place where you're having to get blood transfusions or really extensive surgery. Like it's basically like I had a C-section to remove those fibroids. So go early, go often, believe your body. And if you get pushback, especially for those of us who are Black, in larger bodies, all the different marginalizations, have them document every single time they push back and explain why in your chart. And that's my story. Let me know if you want to know anything else.